Okay, so get this. Today, we are diving deep into some seriously baffling objects.
Oh, I like baffling. Tell me more.
Yeah, like the kind of things that make you go, hold up, did aliens swing by Earth way before the History Channel was even a thing?
I see where you're going with this.
You got it, we're talking about those so-called ancient alien artifacts stuff found right here on Earth that might hint at, well, extraterrestrial visitors in the past.
Okay, I'm hooked already. What kind of stuff are we talking about?
Well, you guys sent in this audio file called 10 Historical Ancient Alien Artifacts, and it's packed with some wild theories.
Sounds like we've got our work cut out for us then, separating fact from fiction.
Right. Luckily, that's where you come in to help us sift through all the speculation and figure out what's really going on.
Well, I'm always up for a good mystery, and this topic, well, it never fails to fascinate.
I know, right? It's like, is humanity really the only intelligent life out there, or have we had cosmic visitors all along?
It's one of the biggest questions out there, and the possibility that evidence of alien contact could be hiding right under our noses.
It's tantalizing, right? Like, what if every museum we visit is secretly an episode of Ancient Aliens waiting to happen?
I love that. Okay, so where do we start with this deep dive? What's first on the alien artifact hit list?
All right, so this audio file kicks off with the Paracas skulls. Ever heard of them?
Paracas skulls. Ring a bell. They're those elongated skulls found in Peru, right?
Bingo! They're famous for their unusual shape.
And some cultures did intentionally reshape skulls,
Right.
like as part of their traditions or beauty standards.
Exactly. But these Paracas skulls, they seem different somehow.
How so?
Well, the audio file mentions a couple of really intriguing things. First, the Paracas skulls have a cranial capacity that's about 25% larger than typical human skulls.
Whoa, 25%. That's a huge difference. That's not just a little extra space up there.
Right. And then, get this, there's also mention of mitochondrial DNA analysis.
Mitochondrial DNA. That's the stuff passed down only through the mother. Right.
You got it. And this analysis supposedly suggests that these skulls, well, they aren't fully human.
Hold on. So they're saying these skulls belong to some kind of human hybrid or a completely different species altogether.
That's what they're implying, yeah. It's wild, right? Like, are we talking about alien ancestors here?
It's definitely a bold claim. And to understand just how significant that would be, we need to, dive into the science a bit.
Okay, so break it down for us. What's the significance of this mitochondrial DNA?
Well, mitochondrial DNA is, like I said, passed down through the mother. So it's a super useful tool for tracing lineages, going way back in time.
Like a genetic breadcrumb trail.
Exactly.
Mhm.
And if these Paracas skulls have mitochondrial DNA that's significantly different from any known human population,
Then it kind of throws a wrench in our whole understanding of human evolution.
it would be a major shakeup, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And there's always a but with these things.
Yeah, there's got to be a cat.
Well, before we jump to conclusions about alien ancestors and rewrite all the textbooks,
We need more evidence.
exactly, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So before we get carried away with the alien hype, we need to remember that.
Okay, so let's say, just hypothetically, that the DNA analysis is verified as being truly unusual. Like, it doesn't match any known human population. What are some other explanations besides aliens that could explain these bizarre skulls?
All right, so putting aliens aside for a moment, there are a few things to consider. First, cranial deformation itself, even if done intentionally, can produce some pretty drastic changes in skull shape.
Right, like those head binding practices some cultures had.
Exactly. And sometimes those practices can be super specific to a certain region or culture, which could explain why we see these elongated skulls in certain places.
So it's not aliens, just like ancient beauty standards taken to the extreme.
It's possible. We also can't rule out the possibility of genetic mutations or developmental conditions that could affect skull growth.
Ah, so it's like maybe there's a gene that causes elongated skulls and it was more common in certain populations.
We've seen examples of this in other ancient populations, so it's definitely something to consider.
It's mind-blowing to think about how much information we can get from a single skull, right? It's like holding a piece of a long-lost puzzle in your hand.
Totally. And that's what makes archaeology so fascinating. Every discovery has the potential to rewrite history, or at least make us rethink what we thought we knew.
It's like each artifact is a clue to a bigger story, and we're trying to piece it all together.
And sometimes those pieces fit together in ways we never expected, which makes it all the more exciting.
Okay, so from skulls to something that sounds like it belongs in a sci-fi movie. the Antikythera mechanism. Have you heard of this thing?
The Antikythera mechanism. Oh, yeah, that's a classic.
It's this ancient Greek device that's basically an astronomical calculator, but it's so advanced for its time that it's like mind-boggling.
I remember learning about it in school and thinking, there's no way people back then could have built something that complex. It was discovered in the early 1900s, right?
You got it.
Yeah.
And when they found it, people honestly thought it was a hoax. Like, no way could something that sophisticated exist over 2,000 years ago.
I can imagine. It must have seemed totally out of place, like finding a smartphone buried in Pompeii.
It's like that, yeah. But researchers studied it and they realized, nope, it's the real deal. It could predict lunar eclipses, track Venus, show the phases of the moon. I mean, come on.
It was essentially an analog computer. And it wasn't just a simple timekeeping device either. It was a full-on astronomical computer, requiring deep understanding of celestial cycles and mathematical principles way beyond what we usually attribute to the ancients.
It just makes you wonder, how did they do it? Did they have some secret knowledge that's been lost to time, or were they just way smarter than we give them credit for?
It's a good question, isn't it? I mean, it's easy to assume that technological progress is this straight line, where we're always getting smarter and more advanced.
Yeah, like the further back in time you go, the less advanced things must have been.
But the Antikythera mechanism throws a wrench in that whole idea.
It's like maybe there were periods of incredible innovation in the past that we've just forgotten about.
Like, what if there are other Antikythera mechanisms out there just waiting to be discovered?
Shivers, man, shivers. That's an exciting thought. All right, let's switch gears now and talk about something a little more visual. The audiophile calls these next artifacts alien coins.
Alien coins. Intriguing. What makes them alien?
Well, the source actually shows images of these coins, and they have designs that some people believe look like UFOs or even those classic gray aliens.
Oh, I've seen those pictures. There's that one from France, right, from the 17th century, with a disc-shaped object in the sky.
Yeah, that's one of them. And then there's another one, an Egyptian coin with a figure that some say looks like an alien.
Right, right. It's
Yeah.
easy to look at those and be like, boom, case closed, aliens.
Right.
But remember what we were talking about with the Paracas skulls?
You mean we have to be careful about viewing the past through our modern day lens?
Exactly. Just because we associate flying discs with UFOs today, it doesn't mean that's what ancient people saw when they looked at those same shapes.
So, like that Egyptian coin,
Yeah.
that figure that people are calling an alien, it could be something totally different, right? Like a god or a mythological creature or something.
It's very possible. We have to remember that ancient cultures had their own symbols and beliefs, which were probably pretty different from ours.
So, how do we even begin to interpret these symbols accurately? It's not like we can hop in a time machine and ask the people who made them what they were thinking.
If only. But what we can do is look at these coins within their historical and cultural context. We can study the symbolism used in other artifacts from the same time period, look at religious texts and mythology, and try to understand what those images might have meant to the people who created them.
Okay, so instead of saying, hey, that looks like a UFO, we should be asking, what would this image have meant to someone living in ancient Egypt?
You got it. And sometimes the answers might surprise us. What we see as a spaceship might have been a symbol of the sun god, or a representation of the heavens, or something else entirely that's lost to time.
That makes a lot of sense. All right, next up on our ancient alien artifact tour, we have something called the Quimbaya airplanes.
Quimbaya airplanes. Okay, I'm officially intrigued. What are we talking about here?
These are small golden objects found in Colombia, and they kind of look like modern airplanes.
Yo way, like little golden jets.
The source even claims that larger versions of these objects were, get this, aerodynamically sound and were tested by German scientists.
Hold up, are we saying that ancient civilizations were flying around in golden airplanes? That's insane.
I know, right? It's a wild claim, but let's not get too carried away. The Quimbaya artifacts are definitely interesting, and the fact that they resemble modern aircraft is undeniably cool, but...
But resemblance doesn't necessarily equal function.
Right. Just because something looks like an airplane, it doesn't mean it can actually fly.
So could it be that they just accidentally made shapes that were aerodynamic? Or maybe they were inspired by birds or something?
Those are both good possibilities. I mean, we know that ancient cultures around the world were fascinated by flight. They watched birds, they built kites, they even experimented with gliders.
So it's not out of the question that they might have stumbled upon some basic aerodynamic principles through observation and experimentation.
Yeah, like maybe they didn't have the technology to build actual airplanes, but they had some understanding of how things move through the air.
Absolutely. And that in itself is pretty impressive.
Right. It speaks to the ingenuity and creativity of ancient cultures.
Just because they didn't have access to the same materials and technology that we have today doesn't mean they weren't capable of impressive feats of engineering and design.
It's like we often underestimate what ancient civilizations were capable of because we view them through our modern lens.
And that can lead us to miss out on some truly amazing insights into their knowledge and skills.
Okay, we've got time for one more artifact before we need to take a break. This one is shrouded in mystery. Some bizarre Mayan artifacts that were supposedly kept hidden by the Mexican government for 80 years.
Whoa, 80 years. What were they hiding?
That's what makes it so intriguing, right? The source describes them as having all this strange imagery, oval-shaped eyes, spacecraft-like figures, and just an overall unsettling appearance.
80 years is a long time to keep something under wraps. It makes you wonder, what were they so worried about?
Right. Was it just to protect the artifacts, or was there something more to it?
Maybe they were afraid of the implications of what these artifacts might reveal.
Exactly. It's like, what if these artifacts challenged our understanding of history in some fundamental way?
Or what if they hinted at something that could disrupt the established order? It's all speculation, of course, but that's what makes this so fascinating.
So, what do we actually know about these artifacts and what they might represent? Are we talking ancient Mayan astronauts here?
Well, before we go full ancient aliens, we need to remember that the Mayans had a rich and complex mythology, and their art often reflected their beliefs about the cosmos, the gods, and the afterlife.
So, their art could be pretty symbolic and abstract.
Exactly. What might seem strange or unsettling to us today could have held deep spiritual significance to them.
Okay, so before we jump to conclusions about Mayan spaceships, we need to understand how these artifacts fit within their cultural and religious beliefs.
Precisely. It's like trying to understand a piece of modern art without any knowledge of the artist's background or intentions. You might see one thing, while the artist intended something completely different.
That's a great analogy, so it's all about context.
Context is everything when it comes to interpreting the past. Without it, we're just making guesses.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground already, from elongated skulls to mysterious coins to possible ancient aircraft.
And we've only just scratched the surface. There are plenty more fascinating artifacts to explore, each with its own unique mysteries and challenges to our understanding of the past.
I know, it's mind-blowing to think about all the secrets that are still out there, just waiting to be discovered.
And who knows what those discoveries might reveal about our history, our place in the universe, and maybe even about ourselves.
All right, listeners, don't go anywhere. We'll be right back to continue our deep dive into the world of ancient alien artifacts after a quick break.
We'll be here, ready to unravel more mysteries.
Stay tuned.
Can't wait.
We're back and ready for more ancient alien artifacts. And I gotta say, part of me really wants to believe we're not alone in the universe, you know? Like, what if some of these objects actually are proof? Are you leaning towards aliens or ancient ingenuity at this point?
You know, it's less about picking a side for me and more about how these artifacts make us rethink what we thought we knew about history. It's kind of like they challenge us to push the boundaries of what we consider possible.
I like that. Pushing boundaries.
And speaking of pushing boundaries, this next one takes us back to Peru.
Back to those elongated skulls.
This time, it's not about the Paracas skulls. It's something even weirder. The source calls it a Peruvian alien skull.
Yeah, I remember this one. It's described as having features that are like straight up not human, like a super tiny mouth, weirdly shaped eye sockets, and even peeling skin. Sounds more like a creature from a horror movie.
It definitely sounds pretty freaky.
Hmm.
But we have to be careful about relying solely on descriptions or interpretations, If we're really going to figure out if this skull is alien or not, we need science.
So, what kind of tests would we need to do to confirm or deny an alien origin? Like, what would be the smoking gun?
Well, a thorough morphological analysis would be the first step.
Morphology.
It basically means looking at the shape and structure of the skull, comparing it to tons of known human and primate skulls.
So, we'd be looking for features that are totally outside the realm of normal human variation, like if the skull had an extra eye socket or something. Well, maybe not that dramatic. But yeah, significant deviations in things like the size and shape of the cranium, the position of the eye sockets, the jaw structure, that kind of stuff.
Okay, so morphology is the first step. What else? DNA, maybe?
DNA analysis would be crucial for sure. We'd want to extract DNA from the skull and compare it to a massive database of known human and primate DNA.
And if it doesn't match anything in the database?
That would be a huge red flag. But even if the DNA is super unusual, we can't just jump to the conclusion that it's alien. There's always the chance of contamination, or maybe the skull belongs to an unknown hominid species from way back.
So we need to be extra careful about contamination and make sure the results are verified by multiple labs.
Exactly. Going to be as rigorous as possible. And of course, dating the skull would be super important too.
See how old it is.
Yeah, to put it in its proper historical context. Is it thousands of years old? Or is it a more recent find? That info can help rule out possibilities or connect it to other archaeological discoveries. It's amazing that a single skull could hold so many secrets, right? Like a time capsule.
Totally. And that's why it's so important to approach these discoveries with curiosity, but also with a healthy dose of skepticism. We want to explore the possibilities, but we also need to be super careful and avoid jumping to conclusions based on incomplete information.
Well said. Okay, from Peru, let's head back to ancient Egypt for this next one. The source calls it the hieroglyphics helicopter.
Oh yeah, this one's a classic. Always sparks some interesting conversations.
The source shows this 3,000-year-old hieroglyphic panel that supposedly depicts a helicopter, a fighter jet, and even a submarine. And when you look at the images, it's easy to see their resemblance.
Yeah, people point to things like rotors, a tail fin, what looks like a cockpit, and say, see, proof.
It's hard not to see it, right? But I have a feeling there's more to this story than meets the eye.
Probably. Remember what we talked about earlier? That whole thing about viewing the past through a modern lens?
Right, right. Just because we associate those shapes with helicopters and jets doesn't mean the ancient Egyptians had the same things in mind.
Exactly. So, what might those symbols have represented to them? Well, hieroglyphics can be super tricky. Sometimes one symbol can have multiple meanings depending on the context. And sometimes symbols together create a completely different meaning than they do alone.
Like a visual language puzzle? Kinda.
Exactly. To solve it, we got to consider the whole context of the panel. Where was it found? What other symbols are there? What do we know about Egyptian mythology and beliefs from that period?
So it's less about saying, hey, that looks like a helicopter, and more about understanding the symbolic language of the ancient Egyptians.
You got it. It's about trying to see the world through their eyes, not ours.
I love that. Okay, let's go way, way back in time now. The next artifact is called the 20,000-year-old nanospiral. And it sounds straight up sci-fi.
Oh yeah, this one's a head-scratcher. Tiny spiral-shaped objects found in Russia, made from tungsten, and dating back 20,000 years.
What makes it so crazy is that tungsten is something we use in modern tech today, like space travel. And 20,000 years ago, humans were still in the Stone Age.
It's definitely a mind-boggling discovery. It's like finding a microchip in a Neanderthal cave.
It just doesn't fit with what we think we know about history, right? So, what are the possibilities here? Could these be remnants of a lost civilization with super advanced technology, or is there a natural explanation?
It's hard to say for sure. I mean, tungsten is naturally occurring, so it's not impossible that these nanospirals formed through some unusual geological process.
Like maybe some crazy temperatures and pressures that created these perfect spirals.
It's possible. Or maybe there are microorganisms out there that can manipulate metals in ways we don't even understand yet. Nature can be pretty amazing, you know?
True, true. Like, think about snowflakes. They're incredibly intricate and they form naturally.
Exactly. So while the idea of ancient nanotechnology is super exciting, we have to keep our minds open to other explanations. We need more research to figure out where these nanospirals came from.
It seems like with all of these ancient alien artifact claims, the key is to balance curiosity with a healthy dose of skepticism. Don't jump to conclusions, consider all the angles, and let science be our guide.
Couldn't agree more. That's what makes this all so fun, you know, the not knowing for sure and having to piece together the puzzle.
Totally. Okay, let's go from nanospirals to something a little more down to earth, literally. This next one is a hat. The Berlin Gold Hat, to be precise.
Ah, yes. The Berlin Gold Hat. It's a beautiful piece of craftsmanship, thin gold, incredibly well preserved. But what's really fascinating about it is its astronomical significance.
Astronomical significance. A hat. Okay, I'm all ears.
It's covered in all these intricate markings, and researchers think they represent a super sophisticated lunar calendar.
No way. So this 3,000-year-old hat is basically a lunar computer. That's insane. It makes you wonder, did they need alien help to figure all that out? Or were ancient people just that much smarter than we give them credit for?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? I think the Berlin Gold Hat, along with a lot of other ancient astronomical artifacts, really challenges our assumptions about the intelligence of ancient people.
It's like we tend to think we're so much more advanced than our ancestors, but maybe we're just advanced in different ways.
Right. They may not have had smartphones and spaceships, but they had something we often lack: time and patience. Time to observe the stars, to experiment, to pass down knowledge through generations.
It's a humbling thought for sure. Maybe we could learn a thing or two from them about slowing down and appreciating the natural world.
I think so. It's easy to get caught up in the hustle and bustle of modern life and forget to look up at the stars and ponder the mysteries of the universe.
Okay, for our last artifact in this segment, we're going from gold hats to something a lot more mysterious. The source calls them metal books.
Metal books? Okay, that's a new one. What kind of metal are we talking about here?
They specifically mention a copper Dead Sea Scroll. Most of the Dead Sea Scrolls were written on papyrus, right? But this one's copper. And it's basically a treasure map, listing locations where valuable stuff is supposedly hidden.
Ooh, a treasure map? That's cool. The Copper Scroll is definitely a unique one. It's written differently from the other Dead Sea Scrolls, and scholars are still debating what it all means.
So we've got ancient treasure, mysterious symbols, a scroll made of metal. It's like something out of Indiana Jones. But seriously, why use copper for a scroll? Was it just practical, or was there something more symbolic about it?
Well, copper was a valuable metal back then, so using it for a scroll definitely suggests that it was important. Maybe they wanted to make sure it lasted a long time, or protect the contents, or maybe even give it a sense of sacredness.
It makes you wonder what secrets are hidden in that copper. Maybe someday someone will crack the code and find the treasure.
That would be amazing. But even if the treasure's never found, the Copper Scroll still shows how ingenious and resourceful ancient people were. They used whatever they could to preserve their knowledge and beliefs.
It's a good reminder that the most valuable discoveries aren't always about gold and jewels. Sometimes it's about expanding our understanding of the past and the people who came before us.
Absolutely. We've covered a lot of ground in this segment. A mysterious skull in Peru, a golden hat that tracks the moon, a copper scroll that might lead to buried treasure, and each one gives us a glimpse into the ingenuity, beliefs, and maybe even lost technologies of ancient civilizations.
It's been a wild ride, and my mind is racing with all the possibilities. But before we go full ancient aliens on this, I want to hear your expert take on all of this. What's the big takeaway? Are we looking at proof of extraterrestrial contact? Or is there a more down-to-earth explanation for these bizarre objects?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? And that's what we'll be diving into right after the break. Stay tuned, folks. The mystery continues.
Okay, so we're back. And the big question hanging in the air is, are we alone in the universe? Or did aliens visit Earth way back when? What's your expert take on all these ancient alien artifacts?
Honestly, I think the truth is probably somewhere in the middle.
Ooh, I like that. A balanced approach. Tell me more.
It's easy to get swept up in the alien hype, but we got to remember, what we know about the past is always changing. New discoveries pop up all the time, and stuff that seems impossible today, well, tomorrow it might make perfect sense with new info and tech.
Yeah, that's true. Like, imagine trying to explain the internet to someone 100 years ago.
Exactly. So, while I wouldn't say no way to aliens ever visiting, I think it's more likely that a lot of these alien artifacts can be explained by other stuff.
Like what?
Well, think about it. Ancient ingenuity, for one.
Mm.
Cultural practices we just don't get yet. Maybe even some natural phenomena that science hasn't figured out how to replicate. And hey, maybe a dash of misinterpretation and good old-fashioned imagination thrown in there too.
So, maybe it's not so much about aliens, but about recognizing that ancient cultures were capable of some seriously impressive stuff we're only just now starting to understand.
Exactly. Take the Antikythera mechanism, for example.
Mm.
It shows that the ancient Greeks were way ahead of their time when it came to astronomy and mechanics.
Right, and that Berlin gold hat, that Bronze Age lunar calendar.
Exactly. They were making super precise astronomical observations and calculations back then. And those Kumbaya artifacts, even if they weren't actually airplanes, they show that humans have been dreaming of flight for a long, long time.
It's kind of like we're looking back at our ancestors and being like, dang, you guys were awesome.
I think that's a great way to look at it. Instead of jumping to aliens, we should be asking, what can these objects teach us about the people who made them? What secrets are they holding that we haven't figured out yet?
It's way more exciting than just shouting, aliens did it!
Right, absolutely. And who knows, maybe while we're trying to understand these objects, we'll stumble across even more amazing discoveries. Discoveries that change how we see history, our place in the universe, maybe even ourselves.
Okay, so for our listeners who are now probably hooked on this stuff, what's your advice? Where should they go from here to learn more?
Keep exploring. Read everything you can find. Watch documentaries. Go to museums. Talk to experts. Don't be afraid to question what you hear and come to your own conclusions.
Love that. Don't just take someone else's word for it. Do your own research, think for yourself, and draw your own map of the past.
Exactly. And remember, the journey is just as important as the destination. Even if we never find all the answers, exploring these mysteries is an adventure in itself.
Well said. So we've gone from mysterious skulls in Peru to metal books in the Middle East. We've seen ancient computers and maybe even alien coins.
It's been a wild ride through the unexplained, and hopefully it's sparked your curiosity.
I know I'm definitely going to be doing some more digging into this stuff. Maybe there's a clue out there that'll finally solve the mystery of ancient aliens. Or maybe, just maybe, we'll discover something even more amazing about our own past.
Who knows? But that's the beauty of it, isn't it? The possibilities are endless.
Couldn't agree more. Huge thanks to you for taking us on this deep dive into ancient alien artifacts.
My pleasure. Always happy to explore the unknown.
And to all our listeners, thanks for joining us on this journey. Keep those minds curious and never stop exploring the mysteries of our world and beyond. Until next time.